among other things. These all add in accessibility to our content. And it's not to say these elements can't be made accessible, but more often than not, this isn't done by the developers behind them. Jeremy Keith said a thing in 2008. He said that let's stop talking about making websites accessible. Instead, let's talk about keeping websites accessible. I'm not saying that HTML is a magic bullet, but as long as you're using the most semantically appropriate elements to mark up your content, you're creating something that is, by default, accessible. It's only afterwards, when we start adding the bells and whistles, that the problems can begin. What Jeremy is saying to us here is that is to understand that when we start working on websites and work on HTML code, the code itself is perfectly fine and perfectly accessible. All the browsers will render the text as black on white, and the content will flow in a hierarchy down the page. So it's only, as I say, when we start adding in the other elements that the CSS, the images, and JavaScript, it's only when we start to mess around with the layout, content becomes inaccessible. As long as we understand this and keep it in mind, we can prevent inaccessibility from creeping into our work. If we go and we look at the HTML5 markup tags, things like header, footer, nav, section, article, figure, aside, time. If you look at all these tags that are available to us, and these are just a small snippet of the ones that we actually have now, they're all self-explaining tags. They're quite self-referential. So by using HTML5, you are making your websites more accessible. Many of the screen readers and adaptive assistive technologies that are used by people who have disabilities are already looking after catering for HTML5 components. And in doing so, they're able to discern, say, that some part of the page is a header based on the fact that the tag now says that, as opposed to trying to pull it out of a class or an ID. It's all a bit more apparent. The HTML5 specification is changing, as Lachlan has just pointed out there. And an example of how much this specification is changing in regards to assistive technologies is that in early this month, May 3rd actually, WebVTT, which is web video text tracks, which is a form of adding subtitles to video, was added to the specification. So that's on the 3rd of May this year. So it's still quite an adaptive time for the specification. And as Lachlan said, we're going to get to a point very soon where that ends. What this means is that in future, our videos will have a facility to provide a file that will act as a subtitle script for the video that we're looking at, and it just means that it'll be more accessible, because many times when we're providing videos online and that kind of thing, if you imagine on YouTube, YouTube has a process which allows you to create a closed caption system for the video, but quite often people don't do that. They're not aware the tool is there. And the reality is that this isn't YouTube's fault that the video isn't accessible to people who can't hear. It's our fault that we're not using our social responsibility and we're not creating the closed caption system for those videos that we put up. So I have my own notes here in front of me, so give me a second. An example, it's quite difficult without showing examples, but an example of how HTML5 is going to be more accessible will be if we look at form elements. Previously, we would have a form field which we would have called, it has a type which is text. And we would add onto that a name, which we would say, the names are pretty much up to ourselves, but quite often we would use things that were quite common across the board. So we would use the name, first name, and then we would use name equals email, name equals phone number, these kind of things. And there was no real way to validate that specifically without creating our own back-end system, without writing in our own code, and without creating our own JavaScript validation. All this is very good and very convenient to us, but if you were looking at it from, say, somebody who was using, who couldn't use a mouse, somebody who tabs through the forms, that kind of thing, somebody who couldn't see the forms, the screen readers that will be reading out the content to them in the background, the classes and the IDs are not always read, so it's very difficult to discern one from the other. Also, as I say, when the JavaScript is turned off, if that's done, then it becomes difficult to validate that on the fly, and it can run into problems, especially with when validation is supposed to be applied automatically to the field. HTML5 now gives us new input types, and I can't remember, I think it's 13 new input types, and the input types are quite more explicit. So they say things like input type email, input type telephone, or tel actually, input type URL. And what will happen now is that the browsers, will start to support, they don't all support it straight away right now, but they will start to support it in validating and making sure that the information that you provided is correct regarding the type of the input field. There's another side to this as well that also helps people who are using touch, I don't want to say mobile, but touch devices, because touch devices will adapt the type of screen, type of keyboard that they're produced depending on the type of input field that they're accessing. So by making the form more accessible and providing more accessible input types, we're actually making it more usable as well to people who use touchscreen devices. CSS3 as well, this is all going to help to improve the accessibility of the websites that we produce. And the reasons why CSS3 is going to do that is because we'll no longer need, if you imagine something as simple as a rounded corner on a box, previously if we wanted to create a rounded corner on a box, we would have had to create an image. So then we would have put that image as a background on an element, or we would have split it up into parts and put it into the various corners of the element and then built our text in around that. That was quite cumbersome. It added an awful lot of code to the way we would create the pages. And it just, in general, if you imagine somebody using a screen reader going through the content of the page, they don't necessarily know what all these extra elements that they're hitting and coming across on the page are. Now with the CSS3, we can do things like we have our rounded corners, we can have our text and box shadows, transforms, transitions, all these different elements that we'll be able to use, which will be done in the CSS in the background without having to apply it to the markup in the foreground. And going back to what Robert said there, the markup is where your content is, and the content really is what you need to protect, and HTML5 is going to help to do this along with CSS3, because we won't have any other bump on the page apart from the content that we need. One other thing as well, what I would say to you here is if you're using hover effects on elements in CSS3, I'd suggest that you add in a focus to your CSS3 as well. And this isn't particularly CSS2 or 3, it's not HTML4 or 5, but it's just one thing that I've seen which annoys me. And people who are using touchscreen devices are also not going to see this. So if you have a hover over on a navigation element, for example, if you imagine somebody looking at that page or that site on a phone or that application on a phone, they won't see that hover. They can't hover with their finger. So if you add a focus or an active state to that, it just gets around that, and it makes it, again, more usable and certainly more accessible for somebody tabbing through the page. Going on to ARIA there, and I'm going to just quickly say what Molly said. The ARIA, by its simplest definition, is a set of roles which is created to support more online type websites. Online application type websites. And it's been said that it's a bridging solution until HTML5 is fully supported, but I don't really think this is the case, because WAI ARIA properties are far more broad-reaching than those available as HTML5 properties. An example of how to understand ARIA roles is that if you take the navigation tag, it's a simple nav tag, and all you do is you add role equals navigation to that, and suddenly it has an ARIA role. Now, ARIA is an element which is supported by many of the latest screen readers and adaptive technologies. I think JAWS has supported it in version 10. It's now on version 12. So it's quite well supported, and it will help to increase the accessibility of your content. In going back to that example, that you may think that's restating the obvious, adding a role which says navigation on a nav tag. But by employing ARIA roles, we're adding another layer of understanding to how assistive technologies can interpret the content we're trying to display on the screen. And all of this helps our users in the end and makes the pages easier to use. Christian Heilemann, who's a developer evangelist from Mozilla, made the point in a recent talk that there was a particular method that of using figures and figure captions and adding in IDs and ARIA IDs and roles that referenced each other. That particular method was very difficult to implement from a back-end perspective. You know, generating unique IDs and pairing them with other tags. It's not very easy, and he does have a point. The reality is that if we're implementing some types of ARIA, sometimes it's easier to do it just on our own small websites, whatever. But the idea that hopefully in time the technologies used by people with disabilities will be intelligent enough to know that, you know, what a figure, image, fig, caption combination means, and it won't require the ARIA elements of it. But we're going to have to wait to see what happens in that. One of the primary functions of ARIA is within its landmark roles, which are kind of super roles. And these describe various parts of your page content. I don't know if anybody's read the book Andy Clark's Hard-Boiled Web Design. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. It certainly goes into this, not in great detail, but certainly it does help to understand how it can be used, even at its most simple level, to begin to make our applications, our web applications, our websites more accessible. If we're employing roles to parse the page, then we're adding this extra layer of understanding. So that's pretty much it. If I was to have an accessibility manifesto, it would be this: to be proactive, to research more and read more about accessibility and guidelines, attempt more things and more ways of doing things, so that you understand. So that when you're doing implementing accessibility, you're implementing it at the start as opposed to at the end. So it becomes part of what you do every day, all the time. And HTML5 and certainly CSS3 will give you the opportunity to start relearning how you do this, because you'll be able to kind of reassess how you're going to implement tags and functionality, and how that might affect somebody who's looking at it, not only somebody, say, who's blind, somebody who's deaf, somebody who uses assistive technology, but somebody who uses it on a mobile device, somebody who's using it maybe on a touchscreen. So, you know, the more you research and you understand this, the more you attempt to try these things out, the better you'll become. So I think that's